Hi, I'm presenting DNS-FLaRE, a flash reload attack on DNS forwarders cache. It's a joint work with Gilad Moav, which is actually his master thesis, and he did most of the work on this project. Professor Anat Bremner-Bar from Tel Aviv University and Professor Amit Klein from the Hebrew University. And I'm Yehuda Afek, also from Tel Aviv University. This attack, the flash reload attack on DNS forwarders cache, is a side channel attack. Through this side channel, the DNS cache, we infer user activity such as browsing activity and IoT activity in a victim's home. Threat model, nothing malicious installed on the victim's computers or systems. Only user is tricked to visit a malicious website. First use case, observing the browsing activity of the victim. Victim visits, say, bank.com, and immediately the time it's important not only to notice that the victim visiting bank.com, but when the victim does visit, the attacker is alerted. Again, nothing malicious installed on the victim's computers. Second use case is an IoT device. When somebody is moving in the victim's home, attacker is notified, and again, nothing malicious on the victim's home or IoT device. Let me see first at a very high level. What we use is a forwarder cache. It's an element of DNS in the home router, either Wi-Fi or cable or any other home routers. They use some kind of a DNS cache to expedite the responses of DNS requests response. And when the user is visiting a particular website of interest, a domain of interest, the attacker notices that the record is in the cache. This is the side channel attack, and is alerted, we know the victim visit this website because it's now in the cache. Let me see in more detail, dive into how it's actually done. Initially, the forwarder cache has all kinds of domains in it. And the first thing, the victim is tricked to visit a malicious website with a JavaScript. Next, attacker owns a zone file installed on some authoritative server on the internet and uses this malicious zone file to flash the DNS, the forwarder cache, fill it up with junky subdomains of flash.com, and removing all the previously existing domains records in the forwarder cache. Next, you wait for 30 seconds, see if there are any activities of the victim. The victim did visit bank.com. After the 30 seconds, we test. Let's see how fast we do a reload of the DNS request for bank.com. If the reload is fast, we know the record is in the cache. If the reload is slow, the request for this domain response is slow, it's probably not in the cache. And we can infer whether the user, the victim, did visit the bank in the last 30 seconds. And we repeat it again and again every 30 seconds to get the timing activity with the resolution of 30 seconds. There are several or 4 major challenges that we need to address. How to do the flashing of the forwarder cache. We use a DDoS attacks we developed a year ago and presented in Usenix 2024. That attack flashes the DNS cache of resolvers. Here we adapt it to flash the cache of forwarders. It's a different type of flashing. And this is how we do it. We just flash the cache. Next, which cache do we use? As I told you, we use the forwarder cache. We will explain why shortly. And how do we do the reload? How do we issue another DNS request to measure the response time? It's not possible in a direct way. We use all kinds of techniques to perform this reload. And there are many caches in the victim's home. we need to make sure they don't get in our way. So, as I told you, we use the DDoS attacks we developed a year ago to flash the forwarder cache. Next, we see that there are several different caches we could use. We could have used the operating system cache or the browser cache. But the forwarder cache is the only one of reasonable size where it's easy for us to mount the attack. Using a larger cache will be much harder to mount the attack. So that's why I use the forwarder cache. Doing the timing is not possible in a direct way because from a certain origin, you cannot issue DNS requests in a JavaScript to different domains. It's an issue in the performance resource timing. How do we do it? We have two techniques that we develop. First, we issue an HTTP request for, say, the bank.com, the domain of interest, but to port 0. What happens, because it's port 0, this request gets an exception and aborted. However, the abort comes after a complete DNS was issued and the response came back. So we could measure the DNS response time. Then, due to the port, using the port 0, the whole thing is discarded and removed. So we got what we need, a complete DNS request and response. And there is simply to reload the HTTP resource for the domain of interest, bank.com, or any domain the attacker wants to infer whether the victim is visiting. And we see that with the DNS, the port 0 trick, we get a very good distinction between the fast reload and a slow reload and give us good results for the attack. We'll see later the results. And the HTTP also give us a good distinction, not as good as the direct DNS, but using the Gaussian knife-based classifier, we can infer which is the one, the fast or reload, with a pretty good accuracy. So that's how we did the timing of the reload. Now we have to see how we deal with the different caches in the victim's home. The victim's home has the caches, as we discussed earlier, forwarder, operating system, and browser cache. When the victim visits bank.com, the record is installed in the forwarder cache, in the operating cache, and in the browser cache. I noticed that not always the operating cache is used or available. We'll discuss it later. In any event, we need to do the timing of doing another DNS request, but the results are in one of these, could be in one of these caches, so we will not reach the forwarder cache, which we want to measure. Is it in the forwarder cache, yes or no? So we need to go around these two caches. Something comes to our savior is a technique in the browser cache, which is network state partitions. Essentially, we have a different cache segment for different origins. If you ask for a domain from one origin or from another origin, it is stored in different parts of the DNS cache of the browser. So this helps us. This was actually developed by Chromium team and other browser teams as a response to an attack mounted by Felten et al. In earlier. So this comes to saves us and help us in mounting the attack because we have different caches for different origins. What the attacker does, it has several extra domain names, the extra origins, attacker 1, attacker 2, and so forth. And when it needs to measure whether a domain is in the cache, folder cache, it asks it from a different domain, from attacker1.com or attacker2.com and so forth. So it is not disturbed by the record being in the origin attacker.com, the blue one. How many different domains the attacker needs? Well, the TTL of the bank.com or the domain of interest divided by the 30 seconds, by the length of the loop. If the loop can repeat several times within one TTL, we need several domains. But if the TTL is larger is smaller than the length of the loop. One subdomain, one such extra domain is enough. And we need also the number of tests we do in the calibration as the number of such domains required. And all of this works if there is no cache or the cache of the operating system is not used. Let me summarize the situation. We have different operating systems and different browsers. Let's see the Chromium. Chromium does not use the operating system cache by design. So on the Windows Chromium, we can mount our attack, and it works both with the direct DNS, with the port 0 or HTTP reload. Same thing on the Mac OS. Linux, Debian doesn't have a cache, so the operating cache does not stop us, and we can use here only the HTTP because the port 0 doesn't work on the Linux. The Ubuntu does use a cache, but this cache is small enough, and actually this is the cache that we attack this time instead of the folder cache. So we use the systemd. It's a third-party DNS element used by Ubuntu that we use to reload, and we can measure with the HTTP reload different parts of the operating system, of the browser, the systemd cache. Safari is not available on Windows, uses the operating system cache on Mac OS, and is not available on Linux. Firefox uses the operating system cache, so it cannot be a measured reload. Same thing, not on the Mac OS. However, on Debian Linux, there is no cache, so it works with Firefox. And on the Linux, we use the attack on the systemd. We know how to measure the responses of systemd, and we can mount our attack on Firefox on Ubuntu operating system. So this is summarizing the different configurations and the possible ways to attack them. We address the 4 challenges. One more technique we have is when you load a page into your browser, there are several extra domains that need to reload, not just the main domain. For example, if you ask for x.com, you also ask for other domains like twing.com, videotwing, twitter.com, apix.com, and so forth. Same thing for other domains. They usually come with extra domains. Measuring the response time for the extra domains can increase your accuracy, and we measure them. It's like a footprint for the different websites we are trying to track. We use, as we said, the Gaussian knife-based classifier to distinguish between the slow and fast responses. Let's see the results. With the direct DNS, we get 86% accuracy in our measurements, and enabling us to tell whether a user is visiting a certain website or there is activity in his IoT devices. With the HTTP, we get about 60% average accuracy, also not so bad. With the IoT profiling, what happens? There is a camera and a user visiting the home. Somebody is moving in the home of the victim. The camera alerts about this movement by issuing a request to alert some domain name of the camera manufacturer. Well, our attack notices this domain is now in the cache, and we know, here in the green area, the response is slow. There was a movement in the victim's home, and we alert the attacker. We did issue responsibility closure. Chromium pretty quickly blocked the port 0 DNS request. Thus, Opera, for example, is another attack browser we attacked, but it uses Chromium as its base infrastructure. And as long as it uses the recent Chromium release, it is patched. Safari patched it and issued a CVE. systemd on the Ubuntu, acknowledge the issue, and will resolve it soon. DNS mask, the manufacturer of the forwarders on home routers, declined to do changes at the moment and suggested we increase the size of the cache. Increasing the cache size on the forwarders is not so easy because the cache size on home routers is very expensive and comes in hardware units. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please visit our lab website and you can see more details about the technique in the paper itself. Thank you very much.